Deniece, you are a special advisor to the US Africa Leaders Summit. Tell me a little bit about the conversations that happen as you lead up to these summits. What are people worried about? What are some of the conversations that you have?
Sure. So the summit, we really, the president convened over about 49 African heads of state in Washington. So it was a huge gathering. We also invited civil society, the private sector, young leaders to also be a part of the conversation. And so I think when we convene such large forums, large events, one of the key important things is collaboration, partnership, and engagement, right? We have to ensure that we're not just talking to government, but we're also including, like I mentioned before, civil society, the private sector, and young leaders. And so for the summit, we were able to host a civil society forum to meet with them as well, a young leaders forum, and also a business forum, right, to bring in the private sector into our policy conversations. And so that's one of the key things that I think was truly critical with the summit, partnership, collaboration, and engagement, and ensuring that we're bringing different stakeholders into those conversations.
So it's a great initiative and it's great that it happened. But very much like this conference, I've heard from a lot of people who have said, we've heard people talk the talk, but now we want them to walk the walk.
Right.
So how are you advising leaders to translate everything they've heard and turn it into action?
Right. And so that's why the president named Ambassador Johnny Carson as a special rep for implementation to ensure that we can truly, follow on with the commitments that were made. The president announced over $55 billion of commitments during the summit, also announced a wide range of private sector commitments. And so I think that, as important as it is to plan these summits, I think it's even more important to follow through on these summits, right? And so the implementation piece is critical. And so working with different stakeholders, the governments, private sector, diplomatic corps, different stakeholders to ensure that everyone, at least creates a team or a point of contact to keep us accountable for what was announced, in December of last year, right? Whether it was announcements in the digital sector or initiatives that we rolled out, what's the progress, what's the status? It's our job to ensure that we're communicating to the public, the progress that's been made, and we're working with different stakeholders. The diaspora, I think, is also another key one, right? Those who live here in the States, but also have deep connections to the continent as well. They want to be a part of these conversations. And so I think, working with them and ensuring that everyone has a point of contact that we can also collaborate with to share, our progress stories as well.
Absolutely, accountability is hugely important.
Right.
But so where do you see the biggest opportunity, or where have you heard when you've been in these meetings, that where do you hear that the biggest opportunities lie on the continent?
As I mentioned, I think during the panel, Africa's youth. Right, we all know the statistics, right? By 2050, Africa's youth will be extremely significant, right? It's growing. There's a youth bulge on the continent. Africa has a young population, and so what can we do to truly harness this youth bulge, right? Whether it's curbing the unemployment rate, but also how can we take Africa's creativity, innovation, and ingenuity that's coming out of Africa's youth to solve some of our pressing global challenges, right? And so doing what we can to empower Africa's youth to have a voice, to allow them to use their creativity to really come up with solutions, right? Problem solving. And so that's something that is a key for us at the summit. President Biden mentioned that, we're focused not just what we're doing in Africa, but what we're doing with Africa. And so collaborating with the youth, helping them to get a voice. In the panel, we heard from one of our alumni from our Washington Mandela Fellowship programs, right? The AU Envoy, and that program is one of our cornerstone programs. It started over 10 years ago. And what we do is we train young leaders from the continent and give them resources to be the next generation of leaders. And I think capacity building is key. I think supporting Africa's creativity and innovation is key, and giving them the opportunity to also solve some of our world problems.
What you said is really key, because you can't work, you have to work with the African leaders, because there's still that older mentality lingers of seeing Western countries come in offering aid, but Africa really wants partners.
Exactly.
They want to do this for themselves.
Precisely.
But tell me, when you're in that room, what are some of the biggest obstacles you hear to doing trade on the continent?
Yeah, so I think as with many things, there's always a challenge, but we want to look at the opportunities, right? as we talk about the opportunities on the continent, there's still a number of crises. Look at the Sahel. There's still a number of issues on the continent, but there's opportunities in those challenges, right? Whether it's climate change, whether it's the youth unemployment rate, whether there's issues across a wide range of sectors, there's opportunities in those challenges. And I think that a lot of the times, Africa's creativity and innovation, they have the answer to that, right? And so giving them the opportunity to truly, I think, have a platform and also be at the table. But sometimes when Africa's youth at the table, they have to know what to do at the table. And that's why training and capacity building is key, right? So we train them, give them the resources they need, and allow them to also build their confidence when it comes to leadership. And so I think that's key. So capacity building is, I think, a challenge. It's something that we are now, I think, looking at a way to truly harness and training Africa's youth in order to, I think, one, make the best out of the youth bulge that's on the rise right now.
So you had a successful summit. You were advising these leaders. What's next? When you look to the future, what do you want to see tangibly accomplished in the next 12 months?
So we had the summit in December. The one we had before that was 8 years. So we don't want another 8 years to pass by before we have another summit, right? And so we're looking at ways of how we can host these summits more frequently to really engage African leaders, African stakeholders, different areas of our foreign policy, whether it's youth, the private sector. And so coming up with a more systemic framework of meeting regularly to convene these stakeholders in Washington, that's the first thing. And also looking at ways of how we can truly, maintain the progress, coordinating with different governments. And so we're working closely with the African DIPCOR in Washington. All of our African ambassadors in Washington, sort of meeting with them frequently and listening to them. I think it's important that we listen to the ideas that they have so that we can also implement, as I mentioned before, right, with Africa, not in Africa, right? And so partnership collaboration, I think, is really crucial.
That's great. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing how that summit goes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.